Hi, good evening, everybody. This is Michael Brown, and this is a hearing on the application of Mr. Celeberti and his company under Chapter 40B for development at 728 Randolph Ave. It's May 4th. I believe this is our fourth hearing. And since our last hearing about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we've received a number of documents from both the applicant, Ms. McKettrick, and the town as well. The most important of which being revised plans submitted by the applicant. I know I have a lot of questions about the revised plans and some other things, but Peter, why don't we start with you? Where are we? What's the deal with these plans?
Sure. What I think we should do tonight, in keeping with what you said about the new submissions, is start off with our engineer, Deb Keller, going through the plans. And they're really of two different kinds at this point, that there are revisions to the site plan related to the existing right-of-way and using that access, which is the intention of the applicant. It had come up with discussions with town planner Tim Chewinski, that there's a possibility that the access road, which shows on the plan, which is owned by the town, might provide access. It doesn't touch the rear of the property. There's a more conceptual plan, if you will, that we submitted. I think Tim might want to say more on that, perhaps after Deb goes through it. I can't say that we can agree that we would switch to that. We acknowledge, without in any way saying that we do not think that the existing plan is workable. We do, but certainly it would be perhaps an easier situation if the access road were available to be used for the project. I've tried to, since it only came up about a week ago, to delve into the title and all of that and find the status. So far, the only thing that could be determined is that the access road is on property that's town-owned. Not clear that it has been laid out as a public way or dedicated for any particular access purpose. We know that it had been accessed to the town landfill, and we know that it leads to the back of the golf course there. We also know that there is the intention of the town of Milton to utilize it for access to an animal shelter, which I believe, if I understand what Tim said, and he can certainly correct me, is for the use of the animal shelter officer of the town, but also in conjunction with a private entity. I believe it's a nonprofit animal shelter type entity. So that to me raises the possibility, if the use can be allowed for public access for some non-municipal use, perhaps the same could be done here. Candidly, what we don't want to get into is delay the project to see if town meeting would approve it and the board of selectmen, if that is necessary. And I apologize because it only came up so recently. Title abstractors are busy and all of that, so it'll probably be a few weeks before I can have the title report on that. So we just wanted to mention that, so you're all aware of it. And of course, you did see the submission on it. I think it makes sense to proceed with the presentation by Deb, mostly on the changes to the existing plans. She can briefly show the access road conceptual plan on the screen. And then we would likewise have our architect go through the changes that came about from the last hearing. Those were submitted, and the main changes are adding some indoor recreational space, a gymnasium or fitness room, also inside a common room for the residents, and some additional space outside in terms of a dog area, dog park area, and recreational area for residents and children. And then, in terms of how you want to proceed, I don't know for sure how much dialogue there's been between Deb Keller and Sean Reardon. Since the last hearing, everything is in flux. So if we haven't responded completely, we apologize. It's not any intention to not respond. It's just with things being in flux, we might not have gone as far as we might otherwise have. So if it's okay with you, I would suggest, Mr. Chairman, that we have Deb take the floor.
Yeah, let's do that in a minute. Just real quick, the timing of all this is really of great concern to me because we only have 4 hearings left before we have to enter deliberations. And the fact that the plans have changed, in my mind, pretty significantly. I have a lot of questions as to whether or not Mr. Reardon's concerns have been addressed. I'm sure that Ms. Keller will get into that, but I'm also going to want to hear from Sean about that as well. And I don't think we should discuss it right now, but maybe at the end of this hearing, we should discuss whether we're going to be able to get all this done. before our deadline. And part of that, I think that the idea of the access road and what it will take to determine whether or not that's workable for this project from a legal perspective, I think that's worth some further conversation as well. So maybe we can save some time at the end for that. Do my fellow board members have any questions for Mr. Freeman before we get started?
No.
No, not at this time.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Peter. Deb, the floor is yours.
Hey, thank you. Deb Keller with Merrill Engineers. Okay to share my screen?
Yes. Crystal, I don't know if you have to give permission, but go ahead.
Yes, I'm going to double check right now. You should be able to.
Yep.
Okay.
Let's see. I will, since we mentioned we'd start, so it's a progress set. I want to be clear with that. We did not, as mentioned, we did have a sort of a meeting with Tim and Sean and the project team and Cliff last week to discuss the potentials for the access road. And then at that meeting, we decided to sort of put a hold on the final review of the plan set, just in case there was any changes to be made. Therefore, what you see is a progress set. We wanted to at least show you that we were moving forward with the changes as part of the review process. So I think as Peter mentioned, the primary components of the comments were the access from Randolph Street. Therefore, we are showing now a full 24-foot wide roadway all the way up to the parking lot with a 20-foot garage driveway access into the building. We had some discussion with the fire department. They asked for a wider aisle in the parking lot for emergency vehicle turnaround. That's been provided. The accessible route from the building would come across the parking lot. There is now a sort of a community playground area in this open location. We have a sidewalk following along the parking lot with a switchback ramp to address grades down to the intersection with the existing driveway here, and then again down, again addressing grades to meet the existing grade at the intersection with Randolph Ave. Excuse me. As also mentioned, outside amenities include additional dog park on the side of the building that can be accessed or walking around the building from the front or parking lot side. We've added an additional recycling dumpster location, some benches outside. And I do know that additional amenities were included inside the building. With that being said, we did provide 2 designated parking spaces for loading and deliveries directly across from the turnaround to allow for access of ease of turnaround in and out of the parking area. What that has done for the site, if I zoom in a little closer, we have ended up reducing the parking spaces. We're still within allowable ratio, almost 1.5 to 1 per unit. We're at 59 spaces total, with 33 within the garage and 26, and that excludes the delivery loading spaces, etc. Skipping briefly to, we did do, as mentioned previously, we did do additional soil testing out on the site. We've added some additional drainage areas. Again, I put on hold because of the discussions we had last week of sending Sean a review package, but all of this would be included in that, a revised drainage study, etc., addressing his comments accordingly. Again, grading here was all maintained. I believe the fire department was looking for at least 10% grade in areas where we have the intersection with the existing driveway. We flatten this out to have a 5% grade for the crossing for the accessible route. Again, flattening it out again at the intersection coming up to the parking lot. Utilities, services, erosion control. We've added some additional erosion and sedimentation control information and construction sequencing. We've expanded the staging area, provided a mobile construction trailer, as well as the entrance construction fencing and erosion control. And lastly, I think there will be this was not fully updated with the walkway down to Randolph Street, but it does show where we have the dog park and the playground and benches and additional landscaping around the building and around the property line. So as a progress set, we also did have lighting completed for the driveway itself and the parking lot and front of the building. That covers what we've done thus far from a site plan perspective. I can either try to answer any questions at this point or move on to the architecturals and the improvements that were done on the building.
I mean, I don't have any questions yet.
Okay.
I don't know if, Nick, do you have any questions, or Jeff?
No questions.
If you could do me a favor, because the screen is so incredibly small to be able to see what you're pointing at.
Okay.
If you could refer, when you're talking to a sheet, if you could give us the corresponding sheet number for what the filing that it has been on this revised plan set, that would be really helpful. So that I can look at it in a bigger, in an easier manner.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just one quick thing. We'll let Andy go forward with the building plans, but I forgot momentarily to mention that we also have Jeff Bandini, and he did send in a supplemental memorandum related to the traffic concerns that have been raised in the entrance on, excuse me, onto Randolph Ave. And that was sent to you folks and to Sean. So after Andy, with the board's permission, Jeff would like to report on that as well. Thanks.
Okay.
Andy? Or do you want to go, were you going to go through them, Deb, or have Andy do them on the building plans themselves?
I was assuming Andy was going to, but I'm not.
Rob, is Andy here, Rob? He said he was going to be.
I don't see him. At least not in the.
Let me see. I do have the progress plans that I believe that were sent. Again, they may be harder to see. Not as big as possible.
So Deb, can you turn to sheet 8-1? I can just walk through.
They're
Okay.
just gonna, Rob, good idea. That's what I was going to say.
Sure, yeah. So she did the 8-1. So Andy, we basically, Andy and I, we sat down and we addressed some of the comments, the architectural comments by Cliff. So if you turn to sheet 8-1, we included some amenities on the inside of the building. We included a community room on the ground floor. Andy addressed all the elevator comments that they don't open up into the stairwell as well. So we configured the floor plan slightly. We also included an exercise room with gym to the right of that. Yep. And then we some just common storage for each of the units. So each of the units would have their own, each individual common storage.
Did add some internal bike racks too, Rob?
Correct. We just, on the internal, we deleted the bike racks on the exterior per the comments of the board. So that's pretty much it on the ground floor. Everything else pretty much stayed the same. We deleted a few parking spaces, obviously.
Okay,
You want to turn to sheet 8-2, Deb?
Yep.
Also on the left side entrance there, we included a package room for all the packages for all the tenants. Sorry.
Come in here. Right.
And on each floor, if you look, Deb, towards the middle there, he hasn't labeled it yet, but we're going to have a community room where all the condominium owners will be able to gather if they want to do a Zoom or whatever they want to do, the podcast, then they could do that in that room. Each floor will have a community room as well.
Is that this here, Rob?
Yeah, we're gonna incorporate both those. Delete that wall there and have one just room because we don't need that closet. Those are the basic changes for the interior of the building. There was some. I know Andy's working on some just more detailing for the screening, the rooftop screening, and the garage screening for the open ventilation. But that's pretty much the gist of it.
Rob, can you or Deb show also on the site plan, which I didn't intend to rush over, but Deb sheets probably need to be pulled up where some additional space has been added?
You're talking about the amenity spaces,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so the best plan for that is the architecture, the landscape plan, Deb. If you want to pull that up, that'd probably illustrate it a little better.
And it's colorful.
Yeah. So we engage. So that is sheet.
DD 1.1.
That's a landscape plan. We engaged with a landscape architect. The site plan was moving a lot. It doesn't incorporate the ADA ramps along the driveway. We're going to have some screening there to screen the ramps. But we included obviously the screening around the northern 736 that goes all the way around. We have a fenced in dog park area, which is a pretty big area for all the tenants to use. We have, if you look at the top of the sheet, we have a planting schedule with all the plantings for the foundation plants and all the trees. That shows all the planting schedule. We also included a playground with some swings and sandbox, etc., for the residents, and some open space with some benches and grass area. And at the left of the emergency vehicle turnaround for the fire trucks. Those are pretty much the updates for the landscaping and the architectural.
Okay, thank you, Rob and Deb. If you have any questions through the chair, Mr. Chairman, that would be fine, or else we can turn to Jeff Bandini.
Why don't we go ahead with Jeff?
Okay.
Sounds good. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Again, for the record, Jeff Bandini, project manager with McMahon Associates. So as of the last hearing that we had back on April 13th, we heard some of the comments from the board and Mr. Reardon, the peer reviewer, regarding concerns about the site distance information at the site driveway. The crash analysis is related to the site, not only the site driveway, but how a unsignalized driveway on the east side of Route 28 would look in terms of crash data compared to some of the other data that we had collected as part of the previous study, namely some vehicle turning movement data at the intersections of Nahatan and Sassamon. And we also looked at, given that traffic information, a comparison of the information from the Institute of Transportation Engineers, which aims to summarize or project the amount of vehicle trips to be generated by any sort of development. In this case, a single family detached housing development. So I'll just take it from the top. So in terms of the available site distance, one of the comments from Mr. Reardon was to put together a graphic and show that the site distance exiting the proposed site driveway and also for vehicles approaching the site driveway from both northbound and southbound on Route 28 would meet the standards from the American Association of State and Highway Transportation. State Highway Transportation, which is the sort of the standard for roadway design in our industry. And so we had put together a updated graphic which showed traffic looking, vehicle waiting at the stop bar, exiting the site driveway, looking left and looking right. And both of those distances exceed the AASHTO guidelines for stopping site distance, both again, looking left and right. And again, that's based on the 85th percentile speed, which we measured when we did the original traffic study back in October of 2021, which we found to be 48 miles an hour is the 85th percentile speed, which is the speed at which 85% of the vehicles are traveling at or below. So we had put together this graphic and we had received some feedback that it appeared that the sight lines incorporated what would be looking through some existing vegetation that is located on the east side of Route 28. And so we put together the graphic and kind of cleaned it up a little bit and populated it with a note to mention that there is no intention as part of the project to trim or cut back any sort of vegetation located either in the state highway right-of-way or on private property. And if that were to be performed or necessary to meet site distance criteria, which we're saying at this point it is not, but understandable with vegetation that it does grow over time, that we would coordinate with Mass DOT and or the town of Milton at that time. As far as the crash analysis goes, so our original traffic study showed that there would be there's no demonstrated safety deficiency at the existing site driveway. And some of the feedback we received was, well, the volume coming out of the site driveway is extremely low. So, you know, there may be some thought that, well, there isn't going to be any sort of safety deficiency if there isn't that much traffic utilizing it to begin with. So what we did was we looked at the crash analysis at both Nahantun and Sassamon, and we researched that crash data over the last 5 years of available data, which is consistent with what we did during the traffic study. So that covers years 2015 through 2019. And we found that there were 8 crashes at Nahantun and 4 crashes at Sassamon. So if you look at those crashes and weigh that against the amount of traffic that is both coming in and out of those 2 driveways based on the data that we collected as part of our previous site visit, and also the data that we collected as part of the traffic impact study that measures the amount of traffic on Route 28. Both crash rates, both roadways were well under the District 6 and statewide average for unsignalized intersections. So given that the composition of both Nahantun and Sassamon, which would serve residential uses, so they have similar entering and exiting patterns, meaning they're confined, you know, mostly to the AM and PM peak hour. You know, it's not like we're comparing different uses to different uses. It's a fairly apples to apples comparison in terms of use. Understandable that Nahantun and Sassamon serve single family uses, but our proposed would be, you know, detached housing. But we feel like the pattern of arrival and departures would fit the need and consistency of the data that we collected. So the other part was the comparison of trip generation. You know, there was a question about, well, how does the trip generation for single family detached housing in terms of ITE nationwide data, how does that fit the scope of a project in Milton located off, you know, Route 28? So again, we turned to the data that we collected on Nahantun and Sassamon as part of our previous study. And we measured the traffic both coming in and out of both of those roadways during the peak hour, and then compared that volume to what the ITE trip generation would be for Nahantun and Sassamon if we were to calculate those values in a vacuum, meaning using the same methodology that we use as part of the traffic impact study. However, the ITE land use code for the comparison purposes, we would be using the single family detached housing, which is the composition of the housing stock on Sassamon and Nahantun. So given that, we compared the data that we collected to ITE for both entities and found that the ITE trip generation comparison for for Nahatan and Sassamon would actually be lower than the volume that we counted as part of our evaluation. So if we were to apply that same logic to the ITE as compared to counted volumes at our proposed site driveway, it's our opinion that the actual ITE trip generation that we proposed as part of our traffic impact study would actually be a conservative value. So given that the site that we're not showing any sort of site distance issues, we exceed the criteria set forth by AASHTO, the crash data that we compared given the residential uses in our traffic volumes and the volume of trip generation compared to the single family detached housing compared to the use on Sassamon and Nahatan. We feel that based on the site distance, the crash data, and the trip generation comparison, that there would not be any sort of detrimental impact for this project as it stands as proposed. So I'd be happy to answer any questions on the our latest memorandum, which aimed to outline, again, the crash data, trip generation, and site distance criteria.
I have a general question for you, Mr. Bandini. Were you able to obtain any traffic data from the state or the town that's been conducted recently regarding traffic speed and patterns on Randolph Ave?
Well, we have the data that we collected as part of the original traffic study. We have not seen any more recent data than that. If it's something that the town or Mass DOT has more information to, would be happy to take a look at that, but we're not aware of any sort of more recent information than what we collected. And again, that was back in October of 2021. So, it's fairly recent in the broad spectrum of how, traffic data manifests over time, pattern shift, and we understand that. Given that understandable, our 85th percentile speed that we found is greater than the speed limit, and we aim to use that conservative value in our estimation. Again, we could have looked at the criteria based on the speed limit, but again, we looked at it based on the speed data that we collected, which we feel is a conservative estimate.
Sure, no, I understand that you're confident in your data. I was just wondering if you had looked, because there is data, I think, out there from other sources, and I was thinking that that could be helpful.
Yeah, we could certainly, try to requery the data. We have contacts over at Mass DOT and at the planning, regional planning, and we can see if they have information available that we may not be privy to.
Okay. I don't have any questions for Mr. Bandini. Does anybody else?
No questions.
Not at this time, thanks.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may, Peter Freeman again, in essence, that is our presentation. We certainly understand there are questions, and we are happy to discuss things with you and find out some direction by the end of the meeting with the items you wanted to discuss, which I wholeheartedly agree with. So certainly now turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for everybody for your presentations. I don't have any specific questions yet, but my concern is that, I was looking at Sean Reardon's letter from March, and he laid out 68 different areas of concern or questions or places that he thought needed supplementation. And I don't know if Sean's had a chance to look at these revised plans. I know he's here and has heard what everybody said tonight, but my question is, which of those 68 items have been addressed by these? Just browsing them while everybody's been speaking, certainly some of them have been. But one thing I would like to do is make sure that the town's peer reviewers are satisfied that their concerns have been addressed.
Michael, do you want me to speak to that at all?
Yeah, if you're able to, Sean, that'd be great.
Yeah, so as Peter mentioned, and again, this is Sean Reardon, Tetra Tech technical review consultant for the board. So we had a really good meeting with the design team and the applicant and sort of fleshed through some of these things. And at that meeting, the concept of the access road came up, and I don't know if one of those 68 comments was actually my request for them to do so. They had a concept plan that was pretty intriguing and sort of showed that it was it was really worth considering. So what we had done was sort of put the review of new material on the back burner a little bit, just to sort of give that time to percolate, and maybe something came of that. That being said, Deb definitely has addressed many of our questions, but like you said, we had a lot of questions, and
Yeah.
I imagine there are still some outliers there. One big concern I have is it looks like the revised plans are proposing an infiltration system underneath the garage. That's specifically a solution that we didn't allow on Blue Hill Avenue, because stormwater standards say it can't be under a foundation, or it has to be 10 feet away from a foundation. So we'd have to certainly look further at that. But you can see a lot of the challenges were solved by very sort of robust moves, and the question is whether they actually work given the site constraints. So the first thing we'd have to do is look at all the revised grading and see if the things that are actually shown on the plan logistically fit in the space that's out there, given how tight it is at the perimeter. So the short answer to your question is yes, they've addressed many of our concerns. We haven't confirmed that they're satisfactorily addressed, and I'm sure there are some other issues that will come to the surface. I actually, Mike, before I move on though, I did have one question for Jeff. Deb, if you could show that entry.
Okay, sure.
Again. So I'm a little confused by his statement about the lack of any required tree clearing in the right of way. Jeff, if you could explain to us how the trees that are on the plan, both sheet north and sheet south, don't impact sight lines as you look left and right from the entry, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, I think what's shown on the plan is it's, if I'm not mistaken, the way it's shown is that the when you're actually looking at through, like, in other words, the sight line doesn't cut through what's shown in terms of like the top of the tree is shown as like its caliber. So you're not necessarily looking through the vegetation as you're trying to look left or look right. Like, in other words, the driver height, which is 2.5 feet, doesn't necessarily go through where the vegetation is. The vegetation is actually much higher than that. So it would be our recommendation to keep any sort of plantings in the right of way to below that driver eye height, which is essentially 2 feet. So any sort of new plantings, we would recommend that not be the case. But the plantings are shown based on our site photographs. Actually, the trees are actually much higher.
So the cumulative impact of the multiple trunks, both north and south of the driveway, don't impact your site distance?
That's correct, yes.
So what I'd ask to have done then is just the site triangles be shown on this plan, so we can actually just confirm that.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yep. Thank you.
Jeff, thank you, and Sean, thank you. So, I mean, I think I mentioned that my concern. So, I don't want to start asking a ton of questions about these new plans before Sean has had a chance. I mean, from what it sounds like, the plans aren't even finished because we're trying to figure out this issue with the access road. And then once they are finished, then Sean's going to need a chance to review them and, give his approval or his concerns. And meanwhile, I know I and the other board members have lots of concerns about the existing proposed access route. And we'll have questions about the two alternative access plans. So, I mean, I guess my question is for you, Peter. How do you want to go about this? We need to have room to have these discussions and flesh a lot of these issues out. I don't know that we're ready to do anything more tonight, but we certainly need to come up with a plan for tackling that.
Sure, and I appreciate that, and that's why I believe in my introduction, I acknowledged that Deb, as Sean corroborated, did kind of not come to a screeching halt, but didn't go as far as we would normally have done. And to your point and concern as to 4 more meetings, I haven't discussed it directly with Rob, but certainly we recognize that, some delay is on our part for sure. And as those of you who've worked with me before, I always advise a client to grant extensions as reasonably necessary, and it may well be, it sounds like it is most likely that extensions would be necessary. I don't think we need to worry about a specific extension on the 180-day period now, but I'm just telling you in good faith that I would expect that my client would do that, be it at the next meeting or hearing after that. I think, although I agree, it probably doesn't make sense to go into great detail because Sean hasn't been able to review everything and Deb hasn't given a point-by-point response to the 68 items that John prepared. I think maybe the best thing to do for this evening, and or Deb also chime in after I finish, maybe just have you folks, the board members, go through some of your still remaining concerns on the say the existing plan as now modified, even though you haven't had a chance to absorb it completely, just to give us an idea. We can also talk about the exit road if anybody has any other knowledge of the history and what the town perhaps has done on other projects, and any thoughts on how it might be possibly approvable, even if it took Board of Selectmen. Again, the main thing is, and it's, candidly a time thing, is not wanting to go through town meeting and also then potentially be rejected. And then where do we go from there? So again, if it makes sense for you folks to, give us some more feedback and or discuss your thoughts and any information you have on the access road, I think that might be a good use of time, even if it's 15 minutes or a half an hour.
Okay, I think that's probably a good idea. But first, Tim has his hand raised. So why don't we let him say his piece?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about the access road issue, and maybe we can start to kind of flesh out a path forward on that. One thing I want to say is that, we definitely asked the development team to take a look at this and to take some time to, try to develop an alternative scheme. So, because I think everyone recognize the promise of that access for the potential for a much better site plan. And so, we definitely do appreciate them taking a look at that, and maybe taking a little bit of a pause on their alternative. Well, it's not the alternative, but sort of working up their existing site plan. I don't want to be sending this team on a goose chase too much because we do have a deadline, and we do need to work within the parameters that are kind of feasible. So the first thing I'll say is that I'm a planner. I'm not a lawyer. So I look at a plan, I look at a site, I look at a piece of land, and I think, how do we develop the best site plan here? And I think anyone that looks at this site says, well, you've already got a road that goes to a signalized intersection. Let's use that. And so, here we are with these sort of two alternatives. The issue becomes, what is the nature of that access road? If you've ever been up there or passed by, that it's gated. If you were to go through that gate and go all the way up, you would end up in the middle of the golf course. It is used to be used to access the dump when it was a dump. Now the dump is a golf course. And really the only folks that are using that road in any kind of meaningful way, I believe occasionally the golf course uses that road, but National Grid has a facility that is accessed from a trail that's off the golf course or that's off the access road. So it's really not a road that's used by anyone except for, the utilities and occasionally the golf course. There is a plan that is still operative and is still ongoing to build a new animal shelter on town land across from the golf course, accessible by the access road. That plan has been in motion since at least 2015. I've been working on it that long. And so there has been contemplated at some point in the future, once that animal shelter is operational, because it will have to be accessed by both the animal control officer, and the intent is for the Milton Animal League to operate that animal shelter. And so there's going to be some measure of public access to that. So at the very least, the thought that's been contemplated is sort of moving that gated access from the very bottom of the road up to the top of the road beyond the animal shelter to allow folks to come to and from the animal shelter. In anticipation of that, there was and now we're sort of getting into kind of the legal status and the sort of what is this road exactly, and who can, who has the ability to grant access to it. The main kind of distinction that needs to be ascertained is this a road that has been laid out by the town as a town way, or is it more akin to a driveway? The analogy that I use is, are we talking about a road like Canton Ave or Walnut Street or Cheever Street, or are we talking about a driveway like the driveway that goes up to Town Hall? If it's a town way that's been laid out as a town way, just like Canton Ave or Walnut Street or whatever, then it's actually the Board of Appeals that can grant access as kind of like the super permit granting authority under Chapter 40B. If it's not a town way, then it becomes a little bit more complicated. We so far have not dug up any evidence to indicate that this has ever been laid out as a town way. It is owned by the town. It is public in the sense that it's in public ownership. But it's only ever been used to access the dump, and then once the dump no longer existed, for the other kind of marginal kind of uses that it's been used for since then. There was a town meeting vote a number of years ago when the animal shelter project was first conceived to I don't remember what the original kind of formal use was, and Marion McKettrick may be able to refresh my memory on this, not to put her on the spot. But there was a town meeting vote a few years ago to transfer the use of that road to, municipal use. Again, with the sort of the thought of there's going to be a municipal facility in the form of the animal shelter at the end of this road. And so we need to kind of clean that up and make sure that that's, a municipal use, for that access road. In the context, I can only talk about this obliquely right now, because again, we don't have any kind of hard and fast evidence one way or the other that this is a town road. But in the course of that town meeting vote, which had to go through the warrant committee, which had to be developed by town council, which had to go through all sorts of research, there again was no indication that this is a town road. And so, as Mr. Freeman alluded to earlier, he is working on some title research. I have town council looking at this. I've got everyone going through their files. I've been making phone calls all over the place. The consequence of it not being a sort of a formal laid out town way is it then becomes up to the town in the form of either the select board on kind of one end of the spectrum or town meeting on the other end of the spectrum to grant access. And in my conversations with town council, what we've kind of, thought of is there are kind of three ways of getting access to this access road by this project. And from the kind of on a spectrum of, real simple, real easy, but also probably not that good, to really robust, but probably very difficult. The easiest and most simple thing is, a license to use the access road, which can be granted by the select board. We grant licenses to use public property all the time. That's a weak solution in the sense that it's revocable by either party. And, as I've had this conversation with Mr. Freeman, probably tough to finance a project based on that kind of weak, access. And, we would really want for such a, a substantial project, we'd probably want something a little bit stronger and a little more robust than a simple license agreement. Unfortunately, the sort of the next most robust option would be an easement. Again, we grant easements over public property all the time, easy peasy, but that would require a town meeting vote. We can accept easements under kind of a typical omnibus, town meeting vote every year. Town meeting will authorize the select board to accept easements for projects and developments all the time. We don't do that sort of thing for the granting of easements. That's got to be a sort of a discrete discussion and a vote by town meeting. And then the strongest possible kind of access would actually be going through the process of laying out the access road as a town way, which has, a little bit more, to it in terms of public hearings and going through town meeting and et cetera, et cetera. But that would then, now it's a street just like any other street, and you go through the normal, regular process to put a driveway onto it. That is something that, we may be looking at potentially in the future, when the animal shelter, comes to fruition. But again, probably, something we would need to game that out in terms of the implications of, there are not a ton of lots that front on the access road, but there are enough that we would want to do a little bit more analysis of, what are the implications of doing this? And so, all of that is to say, and I have been talking for quite a bit, so I apologize. I'll wrap up right now. All of that is to say that I think that when you look at these alternative plans, I think they are better than the original plan. I don't want, Mr. Freeman, said earlier that they still believe the original plan is workable. I tend to agree, but that doesn't mean that there are not better plans out there. And I think the access road access provides a better site plan. That being said, in order to do that, there's a fair amount of uncertainty, to say nothing of timing in terms of, getting an article to what would probably be a fall town meeting. If there's no predicting town meeting, I can't even, I can say that, the select board would be likely to support something like this if we had a little bit more discussion and analysis of it. I think you could get abutters on board with a better site plan, but I can't say that town meeting would or would not vote for anything. I've been burned on that sort of thing in the past. So it really then becomes up to the applicant to make a decision on kind of their tolerance for that sort of unpredictability. So I think just looking at it, purely from a planning perspective, I think accessing the access road gives the project a lot more flexibility, a lot more, it puts the traffic out on the signalized intersection. It gives it a little bit more elbow room in terms of pervious surface and stormwater infiltration and all of that. But the risk becomes, what if you don't get that easement? What if you don't get that, that layout? And that's something that, the developer and the applicant need to, assess their appetite for that sort of risk and uncertainty. So, we're continuing to look into it. We may be able to pull a rabbit out of the hat and discover that at some point it was laid out as a town way, in which case we're having a different conversation. But I don't have a timeline for that. I don't know, to the extent that evidence exists, when we'll find it, if it exists at all. So that's kind of where we are on that. And I think that's how you should kind of think about and look at, these alternatives. It becomes about, what is the applicant's appetite for that sort of timeline of, going to a fall town meeting and kind of rolling the dice. That's all I've got right now.
Tim, thank you very much. That was a really good summary and a great job and very informative. Really shed a lot of light for me on what's going on with that access road. I mean, here's the way I look at it. I've, I guess, two things to say about the existing proposal. I mean, one, so for those who haven't seen it, Mr. Freeman submitted a memo this afternoon at about 3:15, responding to, I think, what he perceives are the board's concerns about the right-of-way being the driveway at 728 Randolph Ave. And the memo centered on 2 points. I haven't had a chance to read it too closely, but the first point being that it's outside of the board's purview to decide who has the legal right to affect the right of way. And I believe, and I've always believed, that he's correct. And I just want to say for the record that this board has no intention of making a determination of who has the right to do what on that right of way. But the reason that that's important in my mind is that, any grant of a permit, I have to imagine, would be conditioned on the applicant having that legal right. And so it's not, all these questions that we've asked are not important because we're trying to determine who has the legal right to make changes to or to use the right of way in certain ways. It's because we need to know the extent to which that's been demonstrated, right? Because we want to know if there needs to be a condition or what. And in my mind, at least to this point, I have no idea whether or not who has rights in that right of way and what they're entitled to do. So tonight, as we sit here, I still have a lot of open questions about that. And I think that the point that, has been underlying all of this, and I think Marion has raised this as well, is that if the application is granted, if permit is granted with a condition about that right of way, or denied because of the lack of site control because of that right of way, I think either way, and probably a half a dozen other ways, could result in a lot of litigation over that. And so the way I see this is that the applicant has to decide its tolerance for that litigation as well as going through the process of using the access road. And that's just kind of the black and white of the way I see it. The right of way is I won't say a paramount concern to me because I'm also very concerned about the water and the infiltration system, but it's a very significant concern in my mind. And I would expect that the other board members share the same concern. So it sounds like there's a lot of work to do. But before we go on and talk about scheduling, I feel like I should ask the other board members if they have any comments or questions.
I have a couple of questions, Mike.
Go ahead, Jeff.
First, for Tim Zawinski. Tim, did the Quarry Hills lease get revised?
What are you referring to?
I think the access road has been leased to Quarry Hills.
I actually don't think that that's the case. I think the lease line, to the extent that it approaches the access road, actually is to the side of it. I don't think it encompasses the access road.
Then they need to explain to the town how they mortgaged it in 2002. It's in their mortgage. So I don't have the lease, and so that may be right, but it's in the mortgage. The mortgage is on record. I don't know the answer. I didn't do the title either, but it's definitely it's in the mortgage. So I think that's a gating issue too, to the analysis that you stepped through, and it would be helpful to know what the status of the access road is vis-a-vis the Quarry Hills tenants.
Yeah, I can certainly check up on that, and we'll obviously need to know that for other purposes. That wasn't my read of the more. Maybe we can chat offline about this, and I can get the lease and everything, and we can kind of take a harder look at it.
Yeah, it's in Exhibit A. I'll get you the page number. It's identified as. Hang on a sec. Let's see. Milton parcel I-38D-8 in Exhibit A to that 2002 mortgage. Book 19797. The actual page is 363. The page of the mortgage is hang on. First page of the mortgage is 327. 17927 327. So I don't know anything about the Quarry Hills lease. It's a long time ago. I did work on it a long time ago, but it's in that mortgage. So, and the notice of lease that's on record really wasn't that helpful. So that's all. That would, I think, be helpful to know. So thank you for that. I have two questions for the applicant, or three questions for the applicant. The first is on the switchback for the accessible path. I think it'd be helpful to see what that looks like, what materials it's made out of, how high it is, where, maybe a same as. I mean, it looks like two pretty extensive structures. So what is that like? Is that the type of thing like you'd see coming off of the Mass Ave Bridge down to the Esplanade, for example? I mean, is that the kind of size or is it much shallower, you know?
So, so this is Deb Keller from Merrill. So you're correct. They are relatively established structures. There would be a retaining wall on the upgradient side as you come. This is a high side. You switch back down to low grade here. So you would have a retaining wall wrapped around concrete surface with railings. If I scroll
What's
to-
it made out of?
Well, it would be concrete.
The whole thing is concrete?
Well, you'd have a concrete, it would be a sort of a retaining wall with a concrete slab. So you could fill underneath it. It would be almost like a foundation structure. But you
And
have.
how high is it?
So the existing grade here is about 130, 131. So you in your walkway here is at elevation 125, matching the parking lot. So you have about a 5-foot retaining wall on this side, and as it would drop off on this side, so that you come around. You'd be I think we're close to being at grade at the 122 right here. Then of course you're sloping down. You're coming back to 120. You're at 124. So you're still a 4-foot retaining wall on this side, coming back down to where you're meeting grade, where you don't have retaining walls. Walking across the driveway here, you have a couple foot retaining wall coming along this walkway through here. So it's 4.5 feet here, about a 4-foot wall as you come in. We're matching existing grade here. You'd have to have a railing around this turnaround, switch back down, and matching existing grade here. So you're actually at grade or a foot lower than the driveway at this corner here, and then you come down and meet grade here as you come into the intersection. So they would have to be detailed. I tried to provide elevations on the grading plan, but moving forward for construction, they'd have to be further detailed.
Yeah, it'd be helpful to, at this point, I mean, you need to do your engineering, but helpful to visualize that's, I suppose it's less complicated than I thought, because I thought the whole thing was elevated. So just because of the various changes in elevation, it's a little bit unusual. I think, I mean, it would help to say, this will look like this other thing that we're familiar with, or that you'd have a picture of, you know? I'm trying to visualize that in my head, and I'm just having trouble doing it.
If I can, so it's just a standard handicap ramp. So if you go, for example, the Milton post office, you know, the ramp that you wind around to get to the front door, that'd be a visual for you.
And that's in both locations?
Yes. Any ADA or handicap accessible, they require, if the building is elevated above sidewalk grade, you need to have a ramp. So you'd
Right.
do the typical concrete slab with your, railing system, ADA compliant, certain requirements of the railing system.
The difference, though, being that there's a retaining wall, so it's kind of the whole thing is sunk into the ground, right?
Right.
On
The retaining
on
wall.
the high side, yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Every handicap ramp has that retaining wall because you're elevating from one lower elevation to a higher. So what you do is you bury the retaining wall so you don't see it, but that's what Deb's alluding to, is the retaining wall that gets buried and some of it gets shown as you come up.
We could try to cut a cross section. Maybe that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Coming
You just
through
show an
one of-
elevation, what it's gonna look like. Sure.
Okay. The other, thank you. The other 2 points I have are with respect to Mr. Freeman's memo. I'll just reinforce what the chairman said about the private party rights. Board's not seeking to enforce private party rights, trying to understand who's got rights in the way so that we can understand how people can safely enter and exit the site. To me, this is a big gating item. I still don't understand how it's going to work vis-a-vis Mr. Dang and Mr. Driscoll's current rights, as I expressed in the last meeting. And then the second point is, I don't see that. I don't see what's going on as a minor adjustment. I didn't read the case. I did read the memo. I see three things happening to the easement, moving south to north. There's a section of the existing easement that will be south of the curbing, which will be inaccessible for the purpose of the right-of-way to Mr. Dang and Mr. Driscoll. So that's, you can see the curb cuts, and I don't know what the treatment is. It says proposed retaining wall guardrail. So Driscoll won't be able to get into that area on the easement area for the purposes of using it. So neither will Mr. Dang. I mean, although he owns the fee, so he can use that for his yard, but he can't use it for access because he can't get there. That's the first thing that happens. The remainder of the easement is made one way. So I just don't think that's a minor modification. Mr. Driscoll and Mr. Dang only have the right to use that going in. They can't use it going out, and that's what their right provides for. I just don't understand that. And then the third way it's being modified is you're purporting to give additional rights to widen the easement, but they don't have rights there now, and I don't know how you're going to force them to accept those rights.
Well, just quick, to understand the concerns on the last one. I think that the MPM case and the restatement of contracts, which is the basis for the MPM builders case, I think that answers it very directly, because you don't need permission. You have the right to relocate an easement. It's still being relocated on 728, the project locus. So I don't think that that's really an issue. The second point, going in reverse, and Deb can explain it further, but there actually is some curbing on the existing right-of-way, which by the same analysis shouldn't be there now with the Tran property 736. And I would still say that within the restatement of contracts and the case law, including the one about overburdening that I provided a memo on for the last hearing, that the access is actually being improved. So I think that addresses that. Deb can go through that more specifically, because your observations as to what's going on are absolutely correct. Oh, and I do agree. And then the first point was a question of they used to have both 718 and 736 owners would have had the right, as it sits there now, do have the right to go basically in and out anywhere they want to on the right of way. And with our proposal, it's being proposed as one way and, each direction. That is true. I don't know that there's specific case with the exact same facts, but I would assert that that's still within the doctrine under the restatement of contracts, that their access is, if anything, being improved. It may sound like it's being restricted because they used to be able to come and go willy-nilly, but actually the access overall is being made much safer. It's being paved, it's being drained properly and all of that, so that their access is being improved. And I respect the question. Again, I understand what both you and the chairman said earlier. You're not trying to determine the way a court would the legal rights, but you want some comfort level, and I respect that. I think we may be stuck with a situation as to whether you're comfortable that this can work as a safe plan. And as you both said, leave the legal situation to the courts if necessary, if the owners of 718 and 736 don't, come to agreement with my client. So again, I do understand those questions. If it's helpful to you, for Deb to just walk through the business about the existing curb that is on the right of way on 736, the 12-foot portion, and what's being proposed now. Deb,
no, I can read the plan. I'm satisfied. Okay. Thank you. I think we're going to have to disagree. I don't think we can take chances with access to and from Randolph Avenue. So we'll have further discussions, but enough said about my concerns. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, again, it's helpful to have gone over it because I respect the questions, and it certainly is an unusual situation. So I hope nobody gets upset about anything, because we're trying to, in good faith, figure it out. But again, I appreciate the concerns and I do understand it, and we'll, do what we can to try to address things from both a legal viewpoint and the practical safety viewpoint.
Yeah, let me just confirm, you are still proposing that some people will be able to take a left and others will not be. Is that correct?
Well, currently it is, but I don't mind saying, without having consulted with my client, I think actually, Rob, we did speak about it. So Jeff and Rob, correct me if I'm wrong, but that was our initial proposal. But given the analysis, especially the additional analysis that Jeff just went through this morning, I'm not sure why there's really the need to do that. Now, that's me as a non-engineer speaking, but based on what I've heard, and I'm putting my own client or consultant on the spot. If you'd rather, think about it and, and talk about it at the next hearing, that's fine. But, that thought has crossed my mind, given this analysis from the traffic perspective.
Yeah, so I'm open to it. This was the right turn only was our initial thought process. But, and Jeff could speak on the traffic, there's only a 20-second turn, waiting turn to the right, and a 30-second, it's only a 10-second difference. And there's no safety issue. And I wouldn't be opposed.
I don't think you can say that. You can't say there's no safety issue. Yeah, you're not a traffic engineer.
The statement was made earlier, so
I know. I just don't think you can say that. That's all. I mean, we're talking about Randolph Avenue. You live on it,
Yeah, I do, and I've
I know.
never. Right. So I've lived on it for 12 years, and there was comments made that you wait, 3, 4, 5 minutes. I've never, in my 12 years that I've lived on Randolph, in this area, specific area, I've never waited 5 minutes or 3 minutes. It is, the traffic report is consistent with what I've waited every morning. So I agree with it. And the traffic report is an independent report. McMahon Associates and Jeff are not going to stick their neck out for anyone. They're going to report what they see and what's the accuracy of what's there. So,
Yeah.
Like I said, originally, that was our intention, to go right turn only. We hear the board's comments, and I'm open to leaving it one exit out and one entrance in. I'm okay with that. So, I'm going to talk to my engineer and Peter, and we may reflect that on our next, revised plans.
Yeah, okay. The reason why I think this is important is you've got a current easement that permits two-way traffic, which you're proposing to restrict to one-way. You're also proposing to restrict it that some people can exit one in to a left, and some people can't. It causes a very confusing intersection. I understand the volumes are low, exiting and entering perhaps, but the speeds are high. And I don't think we need to remind people of the concerns that everybody in the town of Milton has about traffic on Randolph Avenue. That's all.
And again, I don't mean to keep saying I respect you, just, to gain any goodwill. It comes down to the experts and how we can do this and satisfy you, which is always any applicant's goal. But I would say just two things. I agree that it does sound confusing, potentially, to have some people restricted from going left, but telling Mr. Driscoll and the owner of 736 that that's okay, you can go any way you want. I'm not disputing that has the potential for being confusing, and my client and our team, we have to address that. The second point, though, I think in some ways speaks to my opinion, which again, these things are gray, the beauty or the lack of beauty of our laws sometimes, and legal doctrines. If it was changing what is now access into the properties on the right of way, access out, if it was changing it, which obviously it can't, but if it was changing it for some reason to just, traffic can only come in or traffic can only go out, that would clearly be a change that adversely affects the other, dominant estate having the benefit of the easement. That would clearly not be within the restatement of easement law and the MPM builders case. I'm simply saying, and I know you disagree, so I'm not, doing anything.
I haven't read the case. I haven't read the case.
Right.
But I just got the memo at, a few minutes.
Understand.
Yeah, I just read your memo. That's all.
I understand. And in that, I can only say mea culpa. I simply meant to do it last week and I forgot. I apologize. No question, it came in late. I'm just saying that the distinction to me is I'm not so sure that with the overall improvements in the right of way, I'm not so sure that it would be considered a negative adverse impact for the present users to have to simply follow the, part of the road that goes out and the part of the road that goes in. And again, there's probably no exact case on that, but it seems to me logical that given the breadth of the statement of the restatement of easement law, indicating that, the intent is if all parties can still use it for the purpose it's intended, then changes are okay. And I know it's rhetorical at this point. I don't expect you to have read those cases at this point. So thank you.
You're welcome. I don't have any further questions.
Dick?
Thank you. I share both of my fellow board members' concerns on these points. I think they've made them forcefully and have spent a great deal of time on it. And I don't really think I have anything to add to what's already been said. So that's it for now.
I just have one question to follow up on Mr. Mullins' comments. I mean, if the applicant's engineers, as well as the personal experience of Mr. Celeberti, indicate that left turns out of this property onto Randolph Ave are not unsafe, then what was the reason for making it a right turn only exit in the first place?
Fair question. I'll let them answer.
Jeff, you want to answer this? But I can answer it. So it's the queuing. It was the 10-second delay between taking a left turn and a right turn. That was the purpose.
Yeah, I'll just
Okay.
step there. The delay was slightly longer, allowing both lefts and rights when you compare the two. I mean, clearly, our trip distribution from the traffic impact study that showed that most vehicles were going right. So it seemed to make sense that there would not be an adverse impact allowing vehicles to turn left. But certainly it makes sense if it comes down to providing a situation that is confusing and potentially proposes more danger to have different traffic control for different folks. We can understand that. I think simply what we're trying to do was mitigate the amount of delay coming out of the site, which we understood was a concern.
Okay, so the revised traffic impact assessment has reached the same conclusions about the wait time making right turns and left turns?
Yes.
Okay, so the wait times exiting the property in the morning during rush hour or whatever, are those have been revised, I guess, and are those in the new report?
They were provided ahead of the previous hearing.
Okay, and that includes left turns?
Yeah, well, the left turns were included in the original study. What we did was we provided a side-by-side comparison just for brevity.
Okay, thank you.
There was new information and then information that was represented just for clarification.
Those are all my questions for now. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
If I could ask a quick question or make a quick statement.
Yes, is that Tim?
No, this is Sean.
Oh, Sean, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so Jeff brings up a really good point about potential confusion. So I'm much more concerned about traffic heading south on Randolph Avenue, not quite knowing what to expect when traffic is exiting this driveway. So if you have a situation where the vast majority of people exiting that driveway are assumed to be turning right, the traffic coming down Randolph Avenue may be sort of conditioned to expect no left turns coming out of that driveway. Then to have a left turn periodically manifest itself in front of you, I think is not an advisable situation. So I would prefer to see traffic be free to execute one movement, either left or right, and let people on Randolph get accustomed to that singularity rather than having two potential eventualities. And remember, there's nothing that prevents somebody that wants to take a left from going up and from taking a right and using the turnaround that Jeff prescribed. So I see the single right turn lane as being a problem from our standpoint. I know it may have some transient value, but it really, the confusion is a problem for us.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Sean. shall we talk about scheduling?
Sure.
Um,
Can I chime in real quick just while we're talking about that right turn issue?
yes, yeah, of course.
The board had asked me to get in touch with Chief King about this. I think Mr. Mullen had actually asked. I wasn't able to connect with the chief, but I did connect with Lieutenant Mark Alba, who is the town's public safety officer, just to talk through, what is the, understanding that, that kind of configuration of, right only for the tenants of the project, but the existing residents on that right of way can do whatever they want. Would be kind of memorialized in the condo documents, but from an enforcement perspective, is that something that they saw as enforceable? And I think you can predict what the answer is that it would be very difficult for the Milton Police Department to kind of enforce that move and really kind of prevent residents of the condo building from making a left. You can imagine, how do you differentiate between someone that lives in the condo building versus someone that lives at the Driscoll property or the Deng property. And now all of a sudden we're doing kind of random traffic stops. So it's from a police perspective, very difficult to enforce that scheme. And so, I think kind of related to Sean's comments, what you'd wind up seeing is a kind of hodgepodge of people making those moves anyway. And so, that's kind of, they didn't have any, I didn't ask in any great detail about kind of any safety concerns. We can certainly drill down into that. I thought, we wanted to kind of pin down the kind of just that enforcement capability first. And they said they would have a really tough time doing it.
Thank you. Thank you for doing that. Very helpful.
Thanks, Tim. So on my calendar, I show that our next hearing is May 25th. And then we have June 15th and July 6th. We're getting into dangerous territory in July with vacations and things like that. Peter, how do you see the rest of this playing out?
Well, again, cognizant of what you just said and had said earlier, I think it might be prudent to not have the May 15th hearing because in part, in addition to our team reconsidering everything tonight, which, as I said, the feedback is extremely helpful. And then the likelihood that my title report on the access road not coming back for at least a few weeks, I think we should not have May 15th. We should keep the other dates and see where we are.
May 25th, it would be.
I'm so right. I'm sorry, but
May 25th.
Even so, I think it makes sense to not have a hearing on that date. I don't know if it's possible to, juggle the date in June, but if not, that's okay. And in June, we would need to assess and be, as I said, reasonable with you folks as to whether we, should grant an extension. That's how I see it. And what I would ask, if it's okay with you folks.
So what are we going to
Can
do?
I ask when the 180 days is up?
August 8th.
Yeah, you're never going to make this.
No, not at all. I can't, and I don't think we can wait until mid-June to start talking about an extension. I'd like to have that discussion now.
Well, I mean, again, I've been very forthright about the reasonableness of requesting an extension. On the other hand, August 8th is still, a full 2 months away. But
we don't have full plans, so we have lots of questions about all the planned access to this project.
Understand, but we may well have full plans by the June hearing in time for Sean to review. And even if not, then there's time for be it later June or July. I just really don't understand the urgency to have it at this point. We're not going to deny a board a time to feel comfortable and have their peer review have time to review. As I say, you weren't on the other hearing I just completed, Mr. Brown, but overall, there was some, push and shove at times, as the other members know, but, with my input, my client always gave, extensions because we realized that they were appropriate. So, I just, I haven't discussed it with my client. If it was, a deadline in a month, we'd certainly have to consider it now, but I would just ask, even if you consider it a little indulgence, based on good faith that I think I've developed over the years, to just let us put that off until the June hearing.
Mr. Freeman, I'm more than happy to grant indulgence wherever I can. The only reason I bring up the issue of an extension is because I have been on these hearings before, and I know how this goes towards the end of the hearing process. And I'm telling you that we're going to get jammed up. I would feel more comfortable. Now you're telling me that you very well may have revised plans by the June 15th meeting, but may not. And it seems to be that you're also saying that Sean will not have had a chance to review those before the meeting that's going to take place in 6 weeks. So, you know, I think I'm pretty justified in asking that we have this discussion now.
Well, I think I maybe said it's a maybe. I didn't say that I didn't think Mr. Reardon would not have a chance to review. Be that as it may, is it okay?
I know. I mean, maybe is
Well,
good enough for me. I mean,
you know, I don't want to create an issue. If it's okay with Zoom, I guess the protocol would be if we mute ourselves, if Rob and I could talk privately on the phone and we'll mute ourselves, it wouldn't take more than a minute. If you would allow us that, you know, brief recess.
that's fine with me.
Okay, I appreciate it. Yeah, I'll just put it on mute. Rob, put it on mute and I'll call you.
Mike, one thing that I'll note, and I think this is obviously something that the Board of Appeals as a whole kind of needs to take into account, because I know you guys have a backlog and kind of would probably want to get on with some other business, but there is a little bit more flexibility in the schedule now that East Milton and Canton Ave have completed, you know, their hearings. So I wouldn't necessarily go as far as to say we're back to the wild west days of the first 4 hearings where, you know, we can have multiple hearings in a week. But I think there may be some opportunity for additional meetings beyond the every 3-week Wednesday schedule if the board decides that it's kind of in its collective interest to hold those.
But that's not really the issue, Tim. It's not that the board can't find the dates to schedule. It's that we don't have the plans to look at, right? So, I mean, even just now, we just had the May 25th date pulled down. So I just don't understand how we could think that we could get it done between now and the 180 days. It just feels to me like, I don't know, it's not workable based upon the ones we've been on. So, I don't know.
Right. And I assume that, you know, some of our peer reviewers and some of the applicants' engineers are going to take vacation in July and August. And I'm not asking anybody to tell me their vacation plans, but that's obviously going to create delays. It's going to happen. I'm telling you. And so, I mean, we're 2 months away from the deadline and we don't have plans. I mean, even the revised plans aren't finished yet. That's the issue.
Yeah, understood. I just if the 4 hearings thing was the issue, it's not. I mean,
yeah,
Jeff, there's plenty of days in the week. There's always been plenty of days in the week, so I
we
get
should use those dates to get clear the backlog of everybody else who's been waiting for a variance for a couple of years. You know,
Right.
I completely agree with that.
Yeah.
There's constructive approvals going out, Jeff. It's wild.
yeah, I don't know if you've heard how I feel about that.
I have not. Maybe that's another offline conversation.
Suffice to say, I'm a believer in government. We can talk, Tim, at your convenience. I mean, I feel like, you know, it's hard to even figure out the efficacy of the design if we can't get this access issue down. The access issue was huge on the last Randolph Ave 40B as well. And, you know, we know how that turned out. So just a big deal. So.
Hey, Crystal, I just looking at the attendees here, and I think Katie Comlin is in the attendees list. I don't know if she wants to be promoted, but I think we should give
Yes,
her
she
the
is.
option.
Okay, I'll move her over. Also, I didn't know if you were ready to take questions or comments from residents, but
I am, yeah.
okay, yeah, Mr. Driscoll, he's had his hand up. Let me move him over.
Yep. Well, I mean, we have to wait for Peter to get back, but
Okay, no problem.
Mr. Chairman, I'm back. I can't see folks because of the screen sharing, but we're back. So when you'd like me to speak, I'm ready.
hi, Peter, thank you. There you are.
All right. So thank you very much for allowing us to talk. So again, as we said, we do want to work with you. So we will grant right now a 30-day extension to that, period to end the hearing. I do want to say that, we'll certainly do every effort, and Deb Keller has been very good. I think she will be able to turn around the plan soon enough to actually have a good review and time for review by Sean Reardon prior to the June hearing. And, certainly when I was talking about perhaps needing some more time, it wasn't any reflection on Deb. And likewise with Sean. I mean, he's been superb in reviewing things and getting things done and always being of great assistance. So if that's okay with you folks, then we do think it would be a waste to do anything on May 25th. But then the next date, if you don't mind repeating the dates after that, because I didn't write them down quickly enough.
Well, I mean, the next date after that scheduled is June 15th.
Yep.
But it sounds, I believe we have some flexibility if we wanted to adjust the dates. That might be something we can do. But if you're telling me that June 15th is a date that you think is good.
No, I'll let Deb chime in. I mean, thinking of at least a week, Deb, and also Sean to chime in, but for Sean Reardon to review. If you're flexible on June 15th, we probably could meet a bit earlier in June. Deb, to put you on the spot, what do you think?
What I would like, and I would like Sean's opinion as well, is that if we plan for June 15th and I can get him plans to review a few weeks in advance, we can have a couple of rounds so that by the time we get to the June 15th meeting, the goal would be that Sean and I are in agreement with the design or as close as we can get, with maybe a few small changes here or there. But that would be, I think, a more efficient or effective way of utilizing that time. Sean, I don't know.
That's what I'd like to see.
Yeah, and I'd say don't even, you feel free to reach out to me issue by issue. So
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't need to see a complete set. If there's anything that you want to talk about, just reach out to me.
Okay, well, I appreciate that on for both of you, and thank you, Sean. So I guess that means that we'll stick with the June 15th date.
Okay, that sounds good. So by June 15th, Deb, you and Sean will have gotten together enough times to reach an agreement on everything that you're going to agree on. And we can hear about those changes on June 15th.
Yes.
Uh,
And I'm
Peter-
going to make the assumption that we are moving forward with the current design access road. If that comes into play again, we'll address it at that time. Does that,
Yeah,
Rob, does that sound appropriate?
we're not gonna do anything further on the access road.
Okay.
Yeah, and so, yeah, so that will be something else.
Okay.
If there is some amazing, proof that it actually is already public and doesn't really need any further permission other than the ZBA, that might lead to more delay, but for a good reason if that happens. I guess based on everything that Tim said, as well as, what I've known so far, it's probably not that likely, but we're going to give it a shot. That's all.
Okay, sounds great.
So I have to apologize to the public because we've been going through this meeting without my inviting members of the public to speak and ask questions. But John Driscoll is here with his hand raised, so I'd like to give him the opportunity to speak.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry about that, John.
No problem. Town planner. When they were doing the assisted living up behind me, they granted them the right of the road to use the old dump road, but you didn't even mention that. I don't know if that is gone by the wayside or is it still there? And then I want to ask the engineer if Mr. Freeman lets me ask her a question.
Sure, through the chair, that's fine.
The engineer, it looks like you moved the cut for my driveway further up. Am I gonna have a little lip when you said you had a flat intersection at the hill at my driveway? So that mean I'm gonna have a little lip going up into my driveway?
No, what we did extend the improvements up the driveway a bit more to match, to tie into the grade. But the goal is that basically what I would call the intersection with the main driveway coming off Randolph and your portion of the driveway, that intersection there, we're flattening that out so that we can meet the accessible route crossing the driveway and going down, so that you'd come up from Randolph Ave at approximately on average an 8 to 10% grade, flatten out to 5%, and then you would then that gets blended back into your current driveway slope going back up to your home.
Oh, I will not have a lip though, right?
No.
All right, thank you. I just need the planner to answer that about the access road.
Yeah, John, thanks for that. So I'm not aware of that grant of access. That does not mean that it didn't happen. So that's something I'll want to take back to the office and look into. So I'll get back to the board on that. And if that's something that indeed, happened, we can maybe back into, how we were able to make that work. And then if not, we'll kind of clarify that. So I'll definitely look into it.
Thank you.
Okay, Crystal, is there anyone else with their hand raised?
There
Doesn't
is
appear so.
not, no. There's
Okay,
no
then.
one else. Go ahead.
Marion, are you okay? You're still on mute, Marion.
All right, I've sent a letter to the board. I don't want to repeat what's in the letter. You'll be able to read it if you haven't already, and it's not remarkable. I mean, the beginning part basically confirms and praises some of the changes that the applicant has made in his site plan and landscaping setbacks. I didn't see the photometric plan, but we'll review it. I did say that I thought he could prove that the photometrics would work. I did talk, though. I did comment a little bit on the legal memo that was provided by the applicant, but now he's provided a follow-up, so I would really prefer to review what he sent today. And I will send another letter, after I review that and look at those further comments. Just to say two things. The access is the critical issue for this development for the Driscolls. It's absolutely critical. I think plenty of time should be spent determining whether there's a way to use the dump access road. The zoning that was passed for the assisted living may have provided that. I want to look at that. I don't remember that, but John Driscoll would remember it because he lives right next door to the site. I just want to give you just a little bit of a very old history, and then to say I will go back and read the lease. But my recollection is not that this part of the road was ever part of the lease, but I'll go back and review that. In 1954, the town acquired the land where the dump was located, purchased it by town meeting vote, and they also purchased the area where they laid out the road. And there is a plan that would be on file with the engineering department for the roadway, which is 40 feet wide. At the time, in 1954, the use of the roadway was restricted to dump access. The vote at that time specifically said that the abutting properties couldn't use it for development or other purposes. Since then, there have been several town meeting votes, I haven't finished looking at all of them, which have changed that right, including those that related to Quarry Hills and the golf course. And then most recently, those relating to the animal shelter, which incidentally is going to be a town animal shelter. There will be volunteers assisting with operating it, but it will be a town shelter. That will be open to the public, and we're working on those plans, and I believe that they're going to go forward. So it certainly makes sense to me that up until the limit of the shelter site, that land should actually be a public way eventually. The process for that is more complicated. And if a way can be found to grant permission through a Board of Appeals process for this development to use the beginning of that way, it would be very beneficial to this project. I mean, most of the problems that we see, the really huge problems, have to do with the access. I mean, as I said in my letter, of course, the Driscolls would rather that this development weren't going to happen. I mean, it's a huge change. It's going to look different. There'll be a lot more people. There'll be a lot more to look at. But once it's developed, everybody will probably get used to it. The problems that could arise have to do with the use of the private way and the limitations on this private way, and in particular, the fact that the private way has no light. There's a traffic light at the access road. And really at the moment, the present time, it doesn't serve a huge purpose, but it goes right into the access road, and it certainly would facilitate its use for this. So, I don't have any particular conclusions at this time. I'm going to do some more research myself on all of these issues. I'm certainly going to be working as hard as I can to see if I can find whether there is a way to approach this that will not take a great deal of time. I mean, I don't think having a special town meeting just to decide this issue would be particularly wise. I imagine the applicant probably wouldn't want to do that. The town has done that on occasion. The next regular town meeting isn't until October. On the other hand, we're already talking about September 8th as the end of this process. So I really think it's worth looking at seriously, no matter what the permitting requirements would be. I believe that this town would support the better access for reasons of safety and for the benefit of the neighbors, even though it's almost hard to imagine, that the town should facilitate the 9th 40B application, but it's here, we have it, it's going to be decided. And if this would make it better, and particularly for the immediate neighbors and for these neighbors who've lived here for so long, and John Driscoll and his wife have done so much for the town, I think that there would be a certain amount of support that would be generated just for the reason that this would be better for them. So thanks for listening. I'll be doing some more research, and I'll provide the board with everything that I can find.
Yeah, please do, Marion. Thank you. I'm interested to see what you turn up. Jeff, did you have a question, comment? Your hand is up. Okay. All right. Unless anyone else has anything, I think we're done. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you very much, and we'll see you on June 15th.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Well,
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.